This is Warren Sprouse, and you're on the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time for 2 hours, looking at life through a biblical lens. I wanted to talk to you about the issues that have come up just recently that place God in the news. We are in the midst of an election cycle. God is factored into this thing in a very dramatic, dynamic kind of way. You're aware of it even if you're not paying a whole lot of attention. We have folks running for the highest offices in the land, and we're talking about them in terms of their religious commitments. Donald Trump, is he good for America? But Donald Trump is not a saint. Pastor Lance Wallnau likens him to a biblical Cyrus. You know who Cyrus was in the Bible? It's an Old Testament character. Cyrus was a pagan king. Cyrus was ruling over Persia in the days of Daniel. When you think Persia, you think Iran, only bigger. Daniel was in captivity because Israel had been taken off into captivity, and then a couple hundred years, I guess it was later, Judah, the southern kingdom, was also taken. And Daniel was a young man, probably not more than about 16 or 18 years of age, but he was a smart kid. And they always took the smartest ones as prisoners to educate and put into their system. Isaiah prophesied much earlier than the days of Daniel, mentioning this King Cyrus by name. Isaiah chapter 44. And he talks about Cyrus, God that is, as his shepherd, and how Cyrus will accomplish all that I, God, please. The point here is that God had used many people up until that point, and he has continued to use many people since then. And God uses, according to Pastor Wallnau, people that he would not necessarily, the pastor that is, like or agree with. He cites Winston Churchill. Churchill was not exactly a Christian. He looked at many of the imperfect men that have come along who fit the times we were living in, and says this next president will no longer appoint several, will no doubt appoint several Supreme Court justices who will go on to shape our world for decades to come. So, shall we stand on the sidelines and let others decide for us? The question becomes, is Donald Trump good for America? The pastor said, I honestly believe that he already has been. He has shaken the political system. Do his comments offend me? Well, at times, yes. Do I agree with all that he says? No, not at all. But could he be a Cyrus, being raised up by God to preserve America? At the time, nobody liked General Patton, but he was surely an instrument of the United States for the right things. The pastor goes on to say, this I know, I will vote for the best chance for America. I will pray for our leaders as I already have. In the end, God will continue to be my source and my hope. I do believe that God has had a hand in America's history. I hope and pray that he will also have a saving hand in America's future. I have a question. What if God's will is to let America choose the leadership most destructive to her reformation, most destructive to her survival. If you have a Bible, or you think you might get to one day, write it down. Romans chapter 1, beginning about verse 17 and going to the end of the chapter. Look at the construct of those verses. They fit into three descending categories and then end up at the very end of that chapter with a whole paragraph, a whole litany of evil, terrible things. And what it's teaching us is that when people, individuals or groups, nations, when people who know the right thing to do and don't do it, that there is a point at which God will give them over to their baser desires. And that's where the three-step sequence occurs. There's an intermediate place, and if nothing changes, there's another level. And if nothing changes, there's that final level. God is not doing it to them. God is simply allowing them to have what they want, what they insist upon having. And at the end of that is a list of truly nasty, horrible, terrible things, social things, character issues, and so forth in people's lives. And read through the list slowly. Look up the words if you need to. America is already there. We have codified the murder of innocent children. We have codified and defended homosexuality. Now, that's not a slam against people who are in that situation. I'm talking about the nation. People who are in that situation are people that should create within us a sense of compassion. But nobody arrives there who hasn't already ignored and deliberately turned their back on everything else God has said and done in their life. And now we have an entire culture who has done that. We've taken it a step farther, and we've moved into transgenderism. Now, I keep looking at this issue and reading everything I can on it, and it appears that there are two categories. There are people who just think they'd like to be whatever they're not. I think Bruce Jenner's in that category. He's on record saying he now seriously thinking about maybe made a mistake, want to go back. But I think there's also some damage to the genetic structures of people today, perhaps as a result of drugs. Not drugs they took, drugs their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents took. Cascading down through the DNA structure. Because there seem to be people coming up, young people, who don't develop along lines that their anatomy indicates they should. They don't develop in terms of the physiology. They don't develop in terms of the chemicals. They don't go into puberty like other people do. They actually begin to manifest body parts that are of the opposite gender. What is that? It isn't that child's fault. It's society's and their heritage, the people that went before them. The Pope this week came out and said that transgenderism is the end of humanity. Stay tuned. He's going to take a lot of heat. So, what would be the will of God for America? And if we vote or we don't vote, what is the significance and what changes would take place? What if we no longer have the right to vote? Would the will of God be thwarted? And the answer is no. It just doesn't work that way. Think about it.